What is up, everybody? I am Leovold, and I'm coming at you with a deck tech for Classic Constructed New Alluring Desire. I've recently been taking this to ProQuests in my local area. I've played officially 4 now. The first 2 I ended up going out to and drop, and while that was kind of unfortunate, I did manage to bring it back for the 3rd and 4th PQ that I went to. Managed to top 8 in 3rd PQ over at Deck Factory in the Ohio area. All that stuff. I'm not going to dox myself. It's a bad idea. Then I also went to an armory at Old School Gaming, where I ended up splitting the finals and securing my invite to London. This was a deck tech, or the deck list, that I've been running the entire season. And so far, I think it's been doing relatively well. I personally like where it's at. I like playing new, which is quite entertaining. Being able to play other people's cards is fun. I just think it's a very good time. And yeah, I think she's in a very good spot right now, along with Dio getting the Armory deck. I think you're actually quite favored in a Dio. Maybe not like exacerbatedly so, but I would argue it's at minimum above 50. So if you're looking to potentially bully the new players that are picking up the new mechanologist goodness, you might want to go here. So today I'm just going to kind of run over the basic things that I'm running and kind of walk you through my choices when it comes to the deck building decisions and how I would typically go about sideboarding for particular matchups, along with some other like potential maybe board inclusions if you want to change some things up for your local metagame. So we're going to start out with the basic equipment that's up here. This is typically what you're going to run pretty much every game. Arousing Wave gives you a 1 block on Battle Worn that allows you to make a Fang Strike. The Fang Strike, I believe, is down here. Allows you to give any attack action card +1, which means you can pump something like a Command and Conquer to 7, which is pretty good. And you could also do this post their blocks, and they can't throw in, like, say, a Sink Below or anything to actually try to cover it up, because D-Reacts can't be played in response to a Command and Conquer. They can still do something like Oasis if they want to, but most decks aren't going to be running Oasis into you, so I wouldn't really be worrying about that. But being able to push this to 7 is very powerful. Beckoning Mistblade, probably a primary dagger for basically every matchup. It's very threatening. Deceptively threatening for a lot of people. So you'll get a lot of people that are blocking this dagger with just a full card from their hand a lot of the time, just to make sure that you can't go wide. Some decks won't, and then they'll get hit with a Prognosis or something else into another like CNC disruptive effect, and it punishes them pretty hard if they take it. So usually you want this is going to be on the board basically every game, like without question. It's probably the best dagger you could possibly run. Tunic is pretty much a given. Gives you resources every 3 turns as long as you don't miss your triggers. Please do not miss your triggers. Also gives you 1 HP in a late game when it gets to the point where, okay, I'm not going to get another resource value out of it. I might as well just go ahead and cash it in for 1 HP. Very good card. Mask of Recurring Nightmares. This card is kind of the build around for the deck, like, core. I am on a very high chi list. So you want to be taking advantage of this hat more or less as much as possible. Except for like one particular matchup, which I'll get into. It allows you to pitch one of your flipped chi cards, one of the inner chis, to, as an attack reaction, ask them to banish any card from their hand. So you can effectively just like, on the really bad hands, if you find yourself with a couple of chi as the only 2 things left, you can easily go like, okay, we'll play the 2 chis, we'll play like an homage, and then we'll banish something from your graveyard, holding priority, flip them both, send a dagger into activate the hat, and you'll at least get a card out of their hand. So it's not like the worst. It's actually pretty good value if you're looking to do the fatigue plan, which I tend to do. So yeah, this is the big ticket item for playing the Mystic Assassin right now, is being able to click the hat a lot. Spider's Bait, pretty generic dagger, has piercing, gives the on-hit text of 1 or more attack action cards on the next time they defend with an attack action card in the turn. So they will get -1. So typically what you'd like to do when you're setting up a turn, like a very bread and butter turn, at least in my regard, is having 2 blues, in like a CNC or like a weakest link or some other 2-cost attack, and you just go pitch a blue to send the dagger on 1. You send this dagger first every time, because this doesn't care about sequencing. At least not as much. You send this dagger first every time. And then you send the piercing dagger. So you send this on 1. You get the buff on your next blue, whenever that is. You send this to get the piercing. And then you also get the potential threat of the on-hit. You'll get a couple of people that'll... This one will get blocked more often than not. So you'll send this with 2 blues, you'll float 2, and then send a CNC after. That's like a bread and butter turn, pretty much. Usually what you're going to want to do. That's a pretty basic turn. It's a 3-card 8 with a good amount of disruption. You set up your arsenal, you get yourself rolling that way. It's a very common turn that I tend to have. Moving forward, we have the basic boots. James Weiss preferred undertow stilettos because there's feet. Attack reaction, pay 1, break this, make a slither in your hand. The slither will give any attack action card go again. There it is. Gives any attack action card go again. It's also ephemeral. Both the tokens are ephemeral. So this will typically open up a lot of your bigger combo turns when you're playing stuff from their banish zone with News activated ability, which I forgot to go over, so we're going to do that now. She has, as an instant, well, first we have your attacks with stealth, which you have a few. Gain, when the chain link resolves, banish all action cards defending this. So for things like electromagnetic somersault, that will put attack actions back in your hand at the end of the chain link, or when the chain link closes, this will actually beat out somersault. Because it's when chain link resolves into the resolution step, top of resolution step, all of the action cards get banished, and then the electromagnetic somersault waits for it to close, which it's not closed yet on resolution step. So it'll fail to find the 2 banished or whatever banished targets they're trying to send back to their hand. Good thing to note if you're playing against Aurora or Cilio, then they're trying to block 6 on you and then send in a somersault, which doesn't always work on the stealth cards. This will still work on something like CNC or E-Strike, though. The generic hits that tag you like Contract, they need specifically to have stealth. So that's something to keep in mind. And it'll also banish all action cards, which is relevant because a lot of these cards that have stealth in your kit are specifically looking to banish certain cards to gain effects. So they also have the instant ability, pitch a chi card. Look at the top card of the opposing hero's deck. If it is blue, you may banish it. Most of the time, if it's blue, you're just going to banish it anyway. And then until end of turn, you may play all blue cards in their banish zone without paying their resource costs. Which means you get to play a bunch of the big stuff for free. So, particularly into Guardians with all the big crushes, the Macho Grandes that are coming in for 8 for like 5, you get to send it as 8 dominate for 0. Seems pretty good. So, that's the main allure, haha, of the hero. Back to the Undertow Stilettos, will give you 1 Battle Worn, similar to your Arousing Wave, and give you the ability to have 2 attack reactions that give you a token that gives either Go Again or A+1. The fact that these are 2 attack reactions on your equipment in one piece of equipment is very relevant for a card that I'm going to go over in a minute. So now we're gone through like the standard equipment suite that you will bring into most of your games. You will bring in this top row basically every time. We're going to get into the core of the deck. The core of the deck for any assassin is Disruption. What is more disruption than Command and Conquer? Good question. There isn't. So, you have 3 copies of Command and Conquer. It's very good. You're usually going to want to play this. You're going to want to try and force cards out of their hand. You're going to make bonded blocking really tough. And if they don't block, they lose stuff anyway. You're going to outvalue them by playing things like Command and Conquer and other things that basically demand them to block you. Even though they're not spending the most ridiculous numbers like a KO's 2 card 9. You're not going to worry about that. So Command and Conquer, basically a given in this deck. You're going to need them. I'm sorry, they are expensive, but you're going to want them because you're going to be sending them a lot. E-Strike, out of the core, this is a generically good card. A lot of the times you can send it as just like a 2-card 7 because you have to tuck a card to play it. There's also times where you send it as just 5 Go Again. Or you just send 5 draw a card and try to set up an arsenal for a following turn, which is also, all of these are very valid. It's a block 3, free extender, can sometimes make your hands go a little bit more smoother by tucking and drawing, and then maybe giving it go again from a different source, like a quicken token that someone gave you, or say like Path Well Traveled, which we'll get to in a minute, that just gives an attack go again. So it can fix your hands, it can tuck some things. Sometimes it's just a 2-card 7, which is totally fine. Out of the core, this is probably one of the most cuttable. If you really don't want to spend the money on them, they're like 30-something, 40-something dollars now. I don't remember where exactly those are sitting at the moment, but if you don't have those, don't worry. They're not like linchpins to your strategy. It's just a generically good card, and I just happen to have them already. Justinic. Probably one of the more powerful, like generically powerful attack reactions that you can possibly run in here. The problem is you need to put it onto an attack action that has 1 or less base power, and then you'll be able to choose one or both. You can have an attack action card with 1 or less base power plus 5, makes it a 6, 2-card 6, pretty good. Then you also have target attack with stealth gains when this hits the hero, banish the top card of their deck, so it gives it an additional banish on the top. And a lot of the cards in here, since you're running a lot of blues, specifically stealth blues, have a lot of 1 base power with additional on-hit effects to go with it. So a lot of it is very much tuned into using that as one of the ways to push over damage and force on-hits into people. It's a very strong card. A lot of the times it's also just a block 3. But when you get these to line up with something that's really good, like a Prognosis or, God forbid, Bonds of Agony down here, it can do some work. So, very good. Get your 3 copies. Very solid, including the deck. Leave No Witnesses, the poor man's Command and Conquer for Assassin. You're going to want to buy both of them anyway. Because this one in particular allows you to have the contract effect of banishing red cards. It comes in as a 0 for 4, has a block 3 text, and on hit, it banishes a top card of the deck and up to 1 card in their arsenal. So this is effectively a different form of Command and Conquer. You'll usually see it come and play with one of the cards that we're about to see that you can kind of see over in the top right here as just a 1 card, like, send something, make them do stuff. It's an annoying card for them to deal with. It's just more arsenal disruption on a breakpoint. Very solid card. Very good pickup for Assassins if you're planning on playing her. Venomous Bite is probably the most generic attack reaction here. It's going to give Assassin or Mystic attacks +3. If you pitch a blue card, it makes the Fang Strike, which gives you an additional attack reaction to give an additional +1, which we went over with the Arousing Wave up here. So you usually want to send a dagger, send one of your 0-cost something or others, and then use the floating resource after sending a dagger for 2, pitching a blue to Venomous Bite, pump it to 4, Fang Strike, you can either put in the arsenal or just pump it straight to 5 to go over Sink Below. Pretty solid. Gives you 2 attack reactions with 1 card. Very nice. Again, we'll go over why number of attack reactions is relevant in a minute. Now we get into probably the most, yeah. This card is a house. Welcome to Codex of Frailty, if anyone has never seen it before. It says, each hero puts an attack action card from their graveyard face down into their arsenal. Each hero that does discards a card. Usually when you're playing this, you don't have any cards in your hand. So, it also gives you a Ponder token, and it gives them a Frailty token. And then has Go again. So, what you usually want to do, at least with this card, you're going to want to empty your hand, have Go again, and then play the Codex. You find like a Leave No Witnesses, or if you have the setup properly, you find like a Leave No Witnesses. Or you find Command & Conquer if you have, like, properly set up for a Command & Conquer turn with, like, Tunic, usually. To be able to force them to put something in their arsenal if they don't already have one. And if they do, they have to discard a card. And then you immediately go to threaten that arsenal anyway. So, it's a very valuable card with the Assassins, specifically with the Arsenal Disruption attacks. It's quite powerful. So, usually, the main 2 turns you're going to use with Codex is you're going to send a couple generic attacks. Usually it might be like Dagger, Dagger. It could be Dagger, Dagger. It could be Dagger, Dagger, like some blue thing if they gave this Go again, into the Codex, into Leave No Witnesses. Force them to put in an arsenal. Or you could just do like a Dagger, Dagger, Codex, CNC because you're floating 2, pitching 2 blues. You could also do like single dagger into like Easter egg. There's a couple of ways you could go about it, but usually you're going to want to set up Codex to have some value, get a couple of attacks in, close the chain, play the Codex, and then send one of either Leave No Witnesses or Command and Conquer at your opponent afterwards to disrupt the arsenal that you just gave them and force them to discard for it. So either they give you basically their whole hand, or they lose the arsenal anyway, and you just get a bunch of free damage, and you set up an arsenal again for the next turn with the Ponder token, which is pretty good. In case people haven't seen Ponder token before, beginning of your end phase, break it, draw a card. You can immediately sink it in your arsenal. There will be very few times where you don't immediately sink it into your arsenal, typically with, like, energy. But most of the time, you're not going to run into that issue. Very strong card. Pick up 3 if you're going to play the deck. It's basically the reason to play Assassin. Or Ranger, but mostly Assassin, I think, in the context of this. Art of Desire Mind is here as just a generic blue block 3 that has some upside. It does have the stealth keyword, and on hit it banishes the top card. It also has whatever this banishes a blue card, draw a card and gain 1 life. So as you see, this works pretty well with Justinic because it'll give that card, when this hits, banish the top card. So it'll just gain this line of text twice. So on hit it would banish the top 2 and it hits for 6. And it would also gain the effects of News ability with the cards get stealth on Chain Link Resolution, banish all cards defending it. So sometimes you'll get people that'll block with blues, and this could be like the one card that you keep for some reason, or maybe it's stuck in your arsenal off of a codex. You just send this for like 1 or 2. They let it hit. Sometimes you get through, you get a blue, you get to sink an arsenal back in, which is pretty nice. Or sometimes they just have to block it. You could even use some other things to like force them to block it with a blue, so you're forced to get a draw and life gain. So there are a couple of ways to go about this. It's very good. I think it's personally quite good. However, this is also one of the more interchangeable ones. You're going to find a couple of these cards that are just generic 0-for-1 blue block 3s are relatively interchangeable with each other. I just personally like these in the slot right now. So you don't necessarily need these. You could maybe go into like blue infects, maybe blue maligns if you really want to hate on Enigma. You could go into stuff like sedate potentially. There are a couple of the on-hit blue block 3s that are just sending ones. As long as it sends 1 and it's a blue block 3 for 0, you can put in basically whichever ones into some of these slots. These are just how I have it set up currently. This one just sends to have the most upside for me, because being able to casually draw, maybe set up turns, and sometimes you get to clip it with a dagger that send this in for 2, and then maybe draw another card or 2 off of banish effects, and just kind of get a new hand, filter through some stuff. It works out pretty well. I personally like it. Now time for my favorite card. This one's a novel. Alright, Bonds of Agony. Another blue 0-for-1 block 3, has stealth. So the big thing here is if you've played or activated 3 or more attack reactions this chain link, it gains +3, and on hit, look at their hand and choose a card. Search their hand, deck, and graveyard to banish up to 3 cards with the same name as the chosen card. Does not have to be the same color, just the same name. And then they shuffle afterwards. So, the main reason that the Arousing Wave and Undertows are very powerful is they are 2 of the 3 attack reactions on your board all the time, ready to go. Which is very good for turning on the Bonds of Agony turns, or threatening the Bonds of Agony turns. It's a very good card. Very good card to potentially, like, pair with a Justinic. So all of a sudden, you pair this with a Justinic, you send in, like, let's say a typical Bonds turn would be something like, I don't know, send in, like, a Spider's Bite, or one of the other daggers. You send in one of the daggers, you float a resource, and then you send in, say, the Bonds of Agony on usually 1, because they'll typically block the dagger. You'll send in the Bonds of Agony, then they have to sit there and think, how high can you possibly get this? Because it can get pretty tall. It can get very tall. So the big problem you'll have is you'll get it to the point where people have to respect it. Like, if they have a really powerful card in their hands, like, man, I really don't want them to take all the copies of this out of my deck. That'd be really bad. I'd hate to lose all 3 copies of Blood Rush Bellow as a KO. I'd hate to lose all of my Boom Grenades as a Dio. I guess I have to fucking block this, or I have to do something about this. I just put a bunch of stuff in front of it. And sometimes they just do that. And that's perfectly fine. Other times, if they don't, you get to sneak over, say you sent like a dagger, you're floating a resource, you throw Bonds, and then you can throw in like Venomous Bite to give it an additional +4 in total with the Fang Strike. and then use a chi as an instant, because Bonds is a blue card. It turns on all the transcend effects, which gives you the inner chi that you can use to pitch to the Mask of Recurring Nightmares as an additional recurring attack reaction in your gear. So this would pump it to 3 off of just like this plus a chi card plus another blue. Or you could do something like Bonds into Justinic into use the Tunic to pop one of the 2 gears over here with either the Arousing Wave or the Undertow to get to your 3. Give it effectively a +5 here. It'll give itself +3. So if you pop it, say, with Arousing Wave of the Tunic, you go Bonds, like, Arousing Wave off of the Tunic counter into, like, a Justinic, and then this will immediately get you to 3. Playing the Fang Strike pumps this to 2. You get this to 7. It'll pump itself up to 10. With the additional on-hit of the Justinic banish off the top trigger, which you can order however you'd like. You can either search first and force them to shuffle, then banish the top card. I personally like to have them banish the top card first, so when I get to see their hand, I figure out, oh, if they banish something that's already in there, I get more value if I pick something else. So, it has shenanigans. People hate this card. But it is very strong. It's usually the best paired with Justinic, if you can manage it. Other times you just send it for, like, it's just like, you send Bonds, you use one of your chi cards, you use a Tunic counter to, like, pop one of the equipments, and then activate Mask, and then it just pumps itself to, like, 5, which is fine. Sometimes it just does that. It's very threatening. You usually get a lot of blocks out of this card. I think it's perfect for this sort of situation. Very good in the deck. Always run 3. Bonds of Attraction is just another one of those blue block 3s with the stealth keyword. This one I personally like right now because of counter blessings. I think it's very good because you're able to hit a random card off the top and then banish any card you want from their graveyard, which effectively, if this hits, you can choose any card, and particularly counter blessings. You just grab a counter blessings out of their graveyard, and it turns this into a 1-card 9. If they let it hit, it's effectively a 1-card 9 because it lowers the amount that they can heal off a counter blessings for the rest of the game permanently. So it's very good. And if you manage to banish 2 cards that share a color with each other, you gain a life as well, which is sometimes relevant. A lot of the times this is just like point-and-click graveyard hate a lot of the time for me, which is why I'm currently on 2. I think it's very good into specifically counter blessings, but a lot of time this is just a blue block 3. Sometimes turns on your chi. Sometimes graveyard hate is useful because you could limit what they get off of, say, Codex or something. It limits their options. So I think it's good. I run 2 currently because I don't really have the room for the 3rd one. It's a little bit interchangeable though. Feel free to run more if you're seeing a lot of counter blessings in your meta. We're going to go ahead and skip the cheat cards for now. We're going to go into Levels of Enlightenment. Levels of Enlightenment is one of the big power cards of the Mystics, because this is where they get the majority of their value. So what you'll typically see is, since this card has the text of choose one for each blue card you've pitched, you get to pick one of each of these 3 modes of draw a card, +2, or go again. You get to choose each of them 1 time. So a lot of the times, you'll see people like pitch to send the blue dagger, usually, because this will give it the go again that you're already looking for, an additional +1. You'll send it to see dagger. They sometimes send Level of Enlightenment. Will hold priority for one of the chi cards. Allow the chi card to resolve, and then immediately... 1 second. Immediately pitch to News ability as an instant before Levels of Enlightenment hits the table as an actual attack. And then it will see 2 blue cards in your pitch zone because it sees the chi along with the blue card that you pitch for the dagger. And then it will also gain the +1 and go again if you hit it with the Beckoning Mistblade. So it'll come in with the go again. You choose draw a card +2, and this is all of a sudden 1 resource, 2 card 6 draws you a card. So it's a 0 cost 6, 0 card 6, 0 card 6 with go again. Pretty good. Sometimes you'll also just get to the point where you can chain a bunch of these together, which is very nice. So this is your main value card, how you pitch a good amount of damage in, how you cycle your hands, how you tend to get a lot of stuff. It's very solid card. I think if you're playing any Mystic Hero, you run 3. There's one particular scenario, which I will go into in a little bit, that you do not want this card in your deck. You have to side it out. And honestly, I'll just tell you right now, it is the New Mirror. Because if she banishes it off the top, she gets to play this for free from your banish zone, and just gets to go absolutely hog wild. You do not want that. So this will come out in the New Mirror specifically. But that's pretty much it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and skip the cheat cards for another minute. we're going to talk about Persuasive Prognosis. This, I think, by itself, is the most annoying card for them to deal with. Ever. At least out of the blue base, this is probably the most annoying card for people to deal with. Because it does have the stealth keyword, it is another adjusted deck target, and it has the on-hit effect of banishing the top card. And then you look through their hand and banish a card that matches a color with the top card you just banished. Banish anything. So say you hit this, you get like a red off the top, and you just go through their hand and pick any red card out, and you banish both. And then whenever it banishes an action card, any action card, you gain life. So if they block with an action card, New's ability will force it to have the banish ability, which means you will gain a life for them blocking it. If they let it hit and you hit an action card off the top, and then you had an action card in their hand, you gain 2 life, they take 1 damage, they lose 2 cards. It's pretty good! So this is a very solid and very annoying card. A lot of people will put equipment in front of this because they don't want to block it. Some people will put like full-blown reactions in front of it because they don't want to block it and give you life. There are a lot of instances where this card is very... It's one of the big disruptive cards. One of your bread and butter disruptive cards. It turns on your chi very easily. You get a lot of value out of it. Very good. Run 3. Always run 3. This is one that you can't cycle out. Persuasive Prognosis and Bonds of Agony are the 2 blue block 3, 1 for 0s that you can't cycle out. They're just that good. Those are the 2. If you're going to have 6 copies of a card, or 6 cards in new as you start, these are probably the first 6 you put in, aside from Command and Conquer and Codex. Like, those, you 100% run those. There's no question. You run it. It's good. Pick to Pieces. This is another one that is mostly cycled out with different options. I personally run it for Enigma a lot, and the reason I'm running this over Malign is mostly because it has the attack reaction, gives it +1. So when you pair it with Pick to Pieces and Justinic, it becomes a 2-card 7, which means the Enigma players can't block it cleanly with 2 block 3s. So I think that pushes it over Malign, having just the straight up damage prevention doesn't work on its card. I think the additional +1 when you get the attack reaction off pushes it up in value for me, specifically for that scenario of pumping it with Justinic, just to make it that much harder for them to deal with, because a lot of the times they'll have to respect it. So this is another one of the ones that can cycle out. If you're not seeing a lot of Enigmas, you can put in, like, I would recommend maybe like Blue Infects in this slot is very good. Maybe Blue Sedates from Outsiders. That's pretty solid. And then the last card in the core that is not the cheese is Surgical Extraction. This is one of the more powerful blue cards. It is another one of the 2 costs, unfortunately. Doesn't have stealth. It has Contract, and banishing blue cards gains you silver, which is very good. And when this hits, you banish a top card of the deck and look at their hand and banish a card. It's basically Prognosis, but it's basically Daddy Prognosis, let's put it that way. This is effectively like Prognosis grown up, honestly. It is very good. I think it's... You're going to want to use this card quite a bit. Like, it turns on your cheese, it's very disruptive, it sends a breakpoint that is just really annoying for them to deal with. It does get cleanly blocked by like a Sink Below or a Fate Foreseen, but a lot of the times you'll be sending in like a dagger, like Beckoning Mistblade, and then this comes in for 5 go again, which is very, very annoying, let me tell you. Oh, man. So this is one of the cards that I think you just put in here. It's a solid blue. You'll like playing it. It does present a lot of annoying value for you, or your opponents to deal with. So now that we've gone through the core, I'm going to go through the cheese real quick. Out of all of the cheese, the only one you are not running is a Drop in the Ocean. So you're running the Homage to Ancestors, which allows you to gain 1, and then the Passover, usually the strongest one is Passover, which banishes any card from your opponent's graveyard. This one gives Go Again, this one gives +1, then you have one that just specifically says Shuffle. You have draw a card, put a card from bottom on the... Put a card from your hand on the bottom, and then put an action card from your graveyard on the bottom. And each one of these are instants, and all of them have the, if you've played a blue card this turn, transcend text to make the inner cheese that make your Mask of Recurring Nightmares and your hero ability function. So, a lot of the times you'll end up having multiples of these in your hand. So some of them will be like, well, Okay, that's a bad example. You'll sometimes have, like, I don't know, Stir the Pot and then, like, Rising Sun, Setting Moon. Excuse me. Hit the wrong button. Sorry. So sometimes you'll just have, like, Stir the Pot and play, like, Rising Sun, Setting Moon and have them both in your hand. What you can do is you can play both of them, like, play one, hold priority, play the second one, and then those two will see each other. So you'll be able to transcend both, get both of their effects, and have 2 Chis in your hand at the end of it, which is nice. So keep that in mind when you're playing. You're able to do that. It's the same way as, like, trying to activate one of them as levels of enlightenment comes into play. It works basically the same way. The one in here that I think some people have issues with is actually the one that is specifically tailored for new. And it is Sacred Art Undercurrent Desires. And let me tell you why. The big one here is that it costs 3. So a lot of the times it's a lot harder to actually activate it. And people will see, like, oh, you gotta jump through so many hoops, you need to play a blue and then activate this and then pitch another blue to actually get it effectively. So it's kind of expensive for what it gives you. But I'm personally running it for the main reason of banishing 2 cards in a hero's graveyard. Because it basically is a 15 damage instant into Counter Blessings decks. Because how Counter Blessings works, if people don't talk about it, because I've mentioned it before. Let's talk about Counter Blessings just real quick. Let's just go ahead and bring up the card so people know what I'm talking about. Okay, Counter Blessings. It says gain X life, where X is 3 plus a number of Counter Blessings in your graveyard. So effectively, you'll get some decks that are out there that have the full rainbow set of Counter Blessings from Rosetta, which means they could gain up to 11 life off of a single red copy if they have all the other copies in their graveyard. So what ends up happening is the graveyard hate from stuff like Sacred Art Undercurrent Desires and Bonds of Attraction allows you to just banish those and essentially deal, okay, you're potentially dealing 8 damage, 7 damage, 6 damage off of banishing a random card in your graveyard. So I think that's worth considering this particular cheat card in the deck for right now, because it turns this into a 2-card 15. If you snipe 2 Counter Blessings. Obviously, if there are no Counter Blessing decks in your meta, that'll change some things. But this also has some extra value of, like, if there is no Counter Blessings and you're up against, I don't know, say, like, you're up against a KO, you're up against a Victor, and they have a bunch of powerful blues that are now in the graveyard from their draw discards or blocking you and all these sorts of things. This just snags 2 of their best blue cards in the yard, gives you 1 of each of the ephemeral tokens in the Fang Strike and the Slither for the +1 and the Go Again, and then gives you the resources back. So this combos really well with stuff like activating new. It usually allows you to go like 2, maybe 3 wide after activating new, because you get the free Slither. You'll usually get a hit with the dagger first, and then like you get to go like 3 wide on their own things. I think this card has its place. It's not the easiest Transcend card to get off. A lot of the times this is just going to end up getting pitched to like Arcane Barrier, or it's going to get pitched to play your daggers, something. You're not going to be playing this as often, but when it does line up, it feels great. So I tend to keep it as just an additional block, as an additional blue that I can pitch. Sometimes does good things, sometimes doesn't. That's okay. The one time this comes out, once again, as I'll mention, is the new mirror. Because if they banish it off of the new mirror, they get all the tokens. You do get the Transcend back in your hand. They give you the resources back. But they gain 2 cards out of your graveyard plus 1 of each token, and they get to play it for free. So that's usually something you want to take it out for. So in the new mirror specifically, the levels of Enlightenment and the Sacred Art have to come out. For the main reason of it, they get it banished, it goes real bad for you real fast. So those have to come out specifically in the new mirror. But other than that, I think it's a very solid include. I think it helps with the consistency of using your hat all the time with the Mask of Recurring Nightmares, as it gives you the chi. It also is notable that it by itself, with 1 extra blue, if you have something to pitch it, will turn on the Bonds of Agony. Because it will give you play Bonds of Agony, you pitch a blue to play this, you get the Transcend, the Inner Chi back in your hand from Sacred Art, and then you get one of each token. So you just get to play this, you get to play both the tokens and click your hat, and then all of a sudden you have Bonds on 5 with text live. And it has Go Again. So there is something to be said about that. It immediately turns on Bonds by itself if you have the additional blue to pitch for it. Otherwise, it's usually just like a pitch, and it's fine. I think it's fine. I think it's worth it. But I am on a high chi list because I am planning on activating Mask of Recurring Nightmares as much as possible and eventually going into using my hero ability to close the game. That is the main goal that I'm attempting to do, as I want to click the hat and just get them out of the resources, and once we get to the late game, use their own things against them. So this happens a lot. That's the main game plan, which is why I'm on 8 total Transcend cards, if my stats are correct. I am on 8 total Transcend cards, 14 Stealth, and all these other handy-dandy graph things. I will put a link to the deck in the description so y'all can read it. But here we are. That's where I'm at with the list. I like it so far. Here we're getting into the inventory, the sideboard. Pretty close to bread and butter. We have the Fate for Scenes and the Sync Belows. Additional D-Reacts, you're going to bring these into the games that you need to block a little bit more. There's like a lot of breakpoints with stuff like Dio, stuff like Aurora, maybe Yacilio here and there, KO, just to get efficient blocks out of your cards, cycle your hand. You're going to bring all 6 of these in for the D-Reacts a lot of the time. The 2 Hiss I bring in specifically for the turns that I need to have like one of the combo turns with News ability and playing blues from their Vanish Zone, typically. So I'm only on 2 of them in the sideboard because a lot of the time when I'm going for one of these 1-cost pump something +3 make a slither, I tend to want to get the extra damage from the Fang Strike more, which is why I'm on 3 of these as opposed to 2 of like 3 of the Hiss instead, because I don't value the Go Again as much unless I'm going up against specifically like Guardians or Brutes, because then I get to banish all the big costs like 5s or 6s from their yard. Sometimes the Guardians I get like 8s with like Cranial Crush, and then you just get to activate new, have this token. You have to play this on an Assassin or Mystic attack first, and then have the Slither token come in and then hold on to it, usually. So you'll want to try to go like, I don't know, maybe send like a Looking for Scrap, float the resources, pitching a blue, or send... It's a little bit awkward to actually get the Slither off without actually cashing it in immediately, is something that I found, because it's just a little bit awkward to get this on an Assassin attack that already has Go Again. Like, a lot of the times in order for that to happen, you have to pitch for Dagger. Like, you can pitch for Dagger, and then if they don't block it, then you can send, like, this in for 2, they block it with a card, you pop it to 5, you keep the Slither, and then you can get to Transcend, do News ability, and then send, like, 2 or 3 of their things at them. Which is cool. But a lot of the times that doesn't come up, and I'd rather just have more damage. So I tend to have only 2 here in the sideboard, specifically for the Guardian and Brute matchups, where I need to have the big pop-off turns from their Banish Zone, right? That's the main thing. Looking for Scrap is another one of those extenders that helps you get a lot more damage across, since you have a lot of attacks that just casually have 1 base power. It turns itself on quite easily. It's only a block 2, sends 5 Go Again. Pretty solid. It's not the worst card ever. It turns itself on pretty good. It's 5 damage. It gives you an extender. Pretty solid. Usually comes into the matchups where you have to kind of race or like deal a lot of damage. This will come into stuff like Enigma. This will come into stuff like Azalea here and there, just to try and force our life total down as fast as possible. It's just one of those extenders that just helps a lot. Oasis Respite, typically I will only bring this into Arcane matchups. Like, sometimes I'll bring it in for Acilio, I'll bring it in for Virtus, I'll bring it in for Kano, and then I'll bring it in when I need to go super long. And this will come in for, like, particularly the Earth heroes, like Verdance and Florian, because my plan is to fatigue them. Usually it works out, but whenever I plan to, like, full-blown fatigue someone, I bring in literally all of the playable cards I could stuff in my deck. So this just happens to be in there. A lot of the times you're going to be bringing this into decks that are doing lots of big instances of Arcade. This is particularly true with Verdance with the Rampant Growth combo, because you get to blank the staff a lot of the time if they're doing, like, Channel Tree where that gives amp 3, and then they get to activate their staff and send 4 arcane. You get to blank that arcane, and they don't get amp on their next thing, so they don't get to double dip anymore. That's usually pretty good. A lot of times you want to save it for the rampant growth combo turn, but a lot of time it's basically just like the sink below for the arcane damage. You only really want to play it off of like a tunic counter typically, so it's a little bit clunky, but it's typically for the arcane matchups. I have 2 in here. I don't really think going up 3 is all that worth it right now. I think 2 is a nice spot. 2 is pretty good. I don't think you need to worry about having a 3rd. I think 2 is perfectly fine, especially since you only really want to be playing it off a tunic anyway. Otherwise, it kind of feels bad. Alright, moving on. We already talked about the Sink Below's Siren's Call. This one is the one that sometimes has value, sometimes doesn't. It's another attack reaction that has you looking at the hero's hand, or at the defending hero's hand to choose a blue card. Specifically a blue card. If you find a blue card, add it to the chain link as a defending card if you do draw. So it is pretty nice to be able to look through their hand and force them to like overblock on a dagger. So like a lot of the times you'll get people to be like, okay, I'll set dagger, you'll float a resource, they'll say no blocks, and you're like, ha, psych, you're blocking it anyway, let me see your hand. And if they don't block it, because they don't have any blues, then you just hit them anyway, and it's fine. You hit them anyway, it's fine, you get some information. If you do hit a blue in their hand, they force them to block something that's usually inconsequential, you get to draw an additional card, and it's just good a lot of the times. There's still a good amount of times where you can put Siren's Call in front of any of your stealth cards and force them to banish a blue for you to play later off of News ability, which is a nice synergy. So that is a pretty big upside to running this card. A lot of the times it is a block 3. It is another reaction for the Bonds of Agony, but you don't typically want to force them to block Bonds of Agony. So it's a little bit of a non-bow there. Another cool thing that you can do is some of the gems are blue, like Will of Arcana, Eye of Ophidia, Arknight Shard, those sorts of things. They are blue cards that can't block, but you can put them in front and force them into the blocking as a blocking card for 0. You can just do that, and it will still work. So you can pull gems out of their hand if they happen to have them. You can pull chi cards out of their hand if you're in an Enigma matchup. You can pull the Miragai out of their hand if they, for some reason, can't play it in time. You can pull stuff out of their hand to force them to block with 0 if it's a blue card. So that's a very powerful thing with this card in some particular matchups. I think it's good enough to run the full 3. A lot of times it's just a block 3 auto reaction, which is not terrible. But it does have a pretty big upside if you manage to hit with it. I think it's good enough to run the full set. Weakest Link will come in specifically for KO, it'll come in for Enigma, and it comes in for Dio a lot of the times, like the Mechanologist items. Because sometimes you get to snipe an item, you get to draw an additional card, put it in your arsenal. A lot of times this is used as a popper, it's used as just a 2-card 6. It's used as a block 3 sometimes, but a lot of times you're going to be wanting to bring these into the Illusionists, you're going to want to bring this into decks that have a decent density of no blocks, so any of the Chi heroes, Prism with your Figments, sometimes you usually put this in as a like a Phantasm Popper, because you need the 6 power breakpoint to just make something go poof a lot of the time. So this is usually in here as a popper. Really good into Enigma, because it's either a popper or it threatens the cheese in their hand, or some of their auras if they can't block it effectively. And there is the added upside of like clipping KO with like Pulpings and Bear Fangs that don't block. You get to snipe those. You get to snipe the gems. It's a pretty solid card. I run 2. You could run 3 if you wanted to make room for it. I personally run 2. I think it's a sweet spot. I'm only really bringing these into like the Illusionists and like the Brutes usually anyway. Dio I think is good enough. I think there's better options potentially for Dio, but if you have them, why not? Doesn't hurt too much. This is a spicy card. Because I'm on the high chi variant with the plan to mostly fatigue a bunch of people, I tend to get to the point where I'm getting to 2nd and even 3rd cycle of my deck, which is where the Cosmic Awakening comes in, primarily. This is where I tend to go with, like, I'll have the Cosmic Awakening, I'll try to set it up with, like, potentially Stir the Pot as a shuffle. So I'll have, excuse me, I'll usually pitch the Cosmic Awakening, or I'll put it in the graveyard and then set it up with, like, Preserve Tradition, or with the shuffle effect, so that I can put stir the pot, and then play like Preserve Tradition, so I get to shuffle, and then like tuck this to the bottom, and then immediately cash in both of these so I can set it up with at least 2 chi. And then when I get to second cycle, I usually find this along with the 2, maybe even 3 chi cards that are already flipped, and I can just send 20 or 15 or whatever. So this is usually like a pitch stack target. It doesn't come up very often. A lot of the times it's just a blue block 3, but in the very long games, I've had a couple times where I have closed the game with a Cosmic Awakening for 20. So I think it's worth running just as a one-of. A lot of the times it's just going to be a blue block 3. You're not really going to get this to go all the way to 20 every single game. That's just not going to happen. But in the super long games, it is a possible win condition. So that's why I like having 1 copy. It's also potentially a very good include as a substitute for one of the 4 cards you decide out for the new mirror, as this is a blue card, block 3, that you don't care if it gets banished, because if they play it for free, it does nothing. So this is a big thing to bring in for the new mirror as well, when you're taking out the 4 cards of Sacred Art, Undercurrent, and Levels of Enlightenment up here. It allows you to keep your blue base relatively high. Warmonger's Diplomacy. I've heard people in Discords talking about this card and thinking, oh, it's not good enough, or kind of clunks up your hand, or it's really expensive. You don't think it's worth like $80 a pop right now. And to be fair, this being $80 is a little bit criminal, I won't lie. But here's the thing. It turns off Rune Blades. It turns off DO for being able to play items off the top. And there's also Azalea, not being able to pump her arrows before sending the arrow and send the arrow. It blanks a couple of these particular heroes that are problematic matchups for you, along with being a blue block 3 that you can substitute in for the new mirror if you need to. And a lot of the times it doesn't particularly screw up your hand anyway. Like, most of the time, you're gonna get... The only instance in which Warmonger's Diplomacy and you choose war was a bad thing is if you immediately draw Codex of Frailty. And even then, you could just arsenal the Codex a lot of the time. So it's really not that big of a detriment for you. So I don't personally see how this is potentially a problem for most people, because I'm only on the Codex of Frailties as the only thing that is potentially a peace target, and then you don't even want to play it when you have peace on anyway, because you can't send the Leave No Witnesses, you can't send the Command and Conquers, so it just comes in as no value, and then you pop a Ponder token and just feel dumb. So I run the full set. These are the 4 things that usually come in for the new mirror to take out for these 4 right here, with the Undercurrent and the Levels of Enlightenment that we talked about earlier. That helps supplement your blue base. It just keeps your blue base at the same, more or less. And it has a lot of upside. A couple of your problematic matchups, a lot of the powerful, popular matchups right now with Dio, Azalea, Viserai, Vincent, all these things. I think it's worth running 3 of. It's very good. I think you run 3 of, no matter what, and people that think it's not good because it breaks your hand is not playing the deck correctly. So, you know, there you go, hot take. Arcane Lantern. This is another piece for your Arcane Barrier set. You're going to be running the Arcane Lantern. You usually take out Spider's Bite for it. It'll be your offhand. This usually comes in as your first piece for AB1, and it'll usually be for the Rune Blades, like the Rune Chant people, typically. You're thinking like Florian, you're thinking like Viserai, you're thinking Vincent, you're thinking Aurora. That's usually where you're going to be bringing just AB1 in, is just this Arcane Lantern, and you're going to keep the other generic gear that you have for breakpoints and such. When you need to go to AB3, I bring in personally Widowclaw Tarsus and Widow Webcrawler. These are allowing you to bring in AB3 Spell Void 2, specifically into Verdance, to make sure the combo turn doesn't work for them. Because it allows you to more or less turn off the Rampant Growth Plume, Rampant Growth Staff. You get to pitch to AB3 and then break these for AB2. Or break these for Spell Void 2, nullify 5 on the staff, along with Oasis, typically, if you have things ready in time, along with Oasis to prevent 9 of the arcane damage and really hobble their big, like, 1-2 combo kill. So that's usually why this is in here. I like having these as AB3s. Why I'm running this over the other pieces is I think having the Tunic resources is pretty relevant, because you do have some 1-costs in your sideboard, you do have 1-cost reactions, and being able to have the tunic counter ready for Oasis, which you're also bringing into the matchups that need AB3, very relevant. And I think because I'm on the high chi list, I never want to take out Hat, because I think Hat is just good enough to make sure that they're constantly on low cards, I'm draining their resources, and I'm getting ridiculous value out of my chi, because I'm not going to be able to click new and get value out of some of these decks, like Kano will just Kano off the top and just rip it and play it into my face anyway. Acilio is not very blue heavy. It sometimes gets verdants here and there, but then you're banishing earth cards for them a lot of the time, and it doesn't feel particularly good. So I personally like having the Hat more, just to guarantee you're getting a card for one of these chis, for one of the chi effects that you're coming into. So that's why I'm on the arms and the legs for particularly the AB3. And I think this works out pretty well for me. It allows me a lot of the times to be able to fatigue the verdances. So personally, I like how it's set up here. You could maybe cut one of these if you wanted to go to AB2 Spell Void 1. I don't recommend it, but you could do it if you wanted to, if you're not running into the verdances and you're not running into the Kanos or anything and don't require AB3, and you want like AB2 for a little bit of insurance into like Acilio a little bit, you could do that, and that way you get to keep, like, I would probably cut the Tarsus first, because a Rousing Wave for CNC for 7 I think is more valuable than a random go again off of your boots. If you wanted to do that, you could do that. Personally, I wouldn't do that. It's worth mentioning though. So that's your AB3 set, along with a special spiciness of Spell Void 2. Thank you, Rosetta Flex slots. Flick Knives. Flick Knives comes in for 3 particular matchups, or 3 particular types of matchups. The first one is Guardians. The main reason you're bringing this into Guardians is you want to be able to guarantee the hit of a Beckoning Mistblade by throwing it at them effectively when you're trying to go for that activate new combo kill turn, because you get to use flicks on, say, like a Spider's Bite, you float a resource, you activate new, and then when the Spider's Bite gets blocked or the Beckoning Mistblade gets blocked or whatever, you send something else, you get to flick the Beckoning Mistblade using the Flick Knives, deal 1 damage, get the on-hit trigger, throw one of their, like, Cranial Crushes or Macho Grandes for, like, 8 or 9 go again, send another one, maybe pop your boots, 8 or 9 go again, and then send a third one, and that's usually how you're going to end up closing the game against these matchups that have power blues that you're trying to get out of their hand or graveyard. So this is usually like how you end up like really closing the door on some of these Guardian decks. It is a little bit strange sometimes. It'll take a little bit of practice of knowing when and where to go for them, but a lot of times if you're able to get to use this as a reaction to throwing one of their attacks that has go again, you throw a dagger, you throw another one of their attacks with go again, get an additional point of damage, and then you send like a third. That's usually when you're going to want to go for the Flick Knife turn, because it's just so much damage. It just gives you, like, you could use this as, like, 1 turn attack reaction with the Beckoning Mistblade to get, like, 8 or 9 value immediately. And it's so nice. It's so nice. I think it's worth running it into the Guardians for that particular matchup. Same thing with Brutes, is they have a lot of 5s and 6s that you'll get out of their blue base, specifically with KO. And you want to get to that point where you can send 2 or 3 of their combo to, like, send 2 or 3 of their blues at them to just, like, really put on the pressure. You want to force them into a position where they have to block, like, a lot in order to just not die, and hopefully you catch them on a no-block turn. This is how you usually try to shut the door on them. Against Brutes, you're typically not as favored. Guardians is kind of a free roll, but into Brutes like KO, this is kind of the way that you manage to bring things back. You're not going to be in a winning position against them very much, because they're just going to have bigger numbers than you. They're not going to want to block very often, and just like they're just going to start sending like 2-card knights constantly. So you're not going to be able to keep up with that, unfortunately. This is how you kind of like get the combo kill, because you get to send in like one of their Banished Smashed Instincts for 6 go again, and then Intimidate a card, and then send another thing, and then send another thing. That's usually how you want to end the games in those types of matchups with Guardians or Brutes. At least that's how I go about it. The third matchup, which people will probably call me crazy for this, Prism. You bring this in for Prism, and let me tell you why. Because a lot of the times when it comes to Prism, is they'll want to flip these angels, right? Let's go ahead and just bring up real quick. Let's go ahead and just search this real quick. This is the big thing that you're going to want to be dealing with. That's the angel that's the figment that makes it. Let's see if we can find it. Here we go. This is the one that you're going to want to be dealing with because it has ward. It says if it would be dealt damage, destroy this to prevent 4 of that damage. The flick knives, as soon as we get back to my decks here real quick, flick knives immediately deals a single point of damage, which will immediately eat the ward on one of these angels the second they flip it. So this is basically sacrifice one of your daggers to kill Angel of Erudition as soon as they flip it. That's usually how you want to use these. You usually want to throw like a spider's bite at it. And it's harder for them to deal with just direct damage like that. Unless they want to pop like maybe their Calming Gesture to make a Spectral Shield. That's something they're going to need to keep an eye on. A lot of the times you're going to be able to put in enough pressure with the Looking for Scraps with Go Again, maybe the E-Strikes with Go Again to force some cards out of their hand. And then after they send in like several blocks to try and keep the Angel alive, you just get to flick it and then kill the Angel anyway. That's the main way that I've been using this in the Prism. So far it's been working out. I think it's worth it. I could be wrong. I think it's worth it. Specifically to kill Angel of Erudition a lot easier, because that's how they snowball the game on you. So that's why you run Flick Knives. Scale Pillar is here for the decks that want to block with equipment a lot, say like Warriors with their Valiant Dynamos and like Kasai, Dory, I guess Olympia, if Olympia is real, maybe Bolton. This also comes in for the Guardians. You'll usually swap this out for Spider's Bite. Instead of, you want to keep the Mistblade basically every game. You want to swap Spider's Bite out into the matchups that don't really have attacks or use their equipment a lot. Like, I could maybe even argue sending this into Brutes if you wanted to, but I personally have been liking Spider's Bite into Brutes more, but this is particularly coming in for Guardians and Warriors that want to use their equipment a lot. It's also very good into the Illusionists like Prism because they can't block it very effectively with Phantasmal Footsteps. So that's typically one of the things that you're going to want to keep an eye on. You can maybe bring this into Prism. I don't know about that one. I think you want to be able to like make their Heralds block less because all their Heralds block 3. So that's something that you might want to keep in mind. But if you really hate Phantasmal Footsteps, this is a good card to deal with it. Vambrace of Determination comes in specifically for Enigma, because you need a lot of hate for Enigma because it's just that bad of a matchup. So, the primary reason is it prevents 1 point of damage. You get to go 2 for 1 with all the Spectral Shields by pumping a resource into it, and it gives you a recurring attack reaction for Bonds of Agony, which is pretty nice. It gives you a recurring attack reaction for Pick to Pieces to just make it so that no damage from it can be prevented for 1 resource, which you'll usually have just 1 hanging. It's something they have to keep in mind basically the entire turn. So it tends to be pretty solid. And sometimes when you get to the point like later in the games with Enigma, you get to, I don't know, pop Tunic for attack, like pop Tunic for a resource on their turn, block with Tunic, block with a Vambrace, and then block 2 with equipment, and just the equipment and the free resource you get from Tunic. Sometimes that comes up. A lot of the times it doesn't. Most of the time you're just using this as a way to try to really threaten the Mirror Guy, because you gotta get the Mirror Guys off the table as fast as possible, otherwise they're just going to run you over with value, because you're not going to be able to contest, like, here's 8, here's 8, here's 8, right? So you want to have this as just an additional way to, like, really pester the ward on the side of the board of Enigma. So this is the main reason that you're going to bring this in. If Enigma's not really in your local meta at all, you probably don't need this. It's particularly Enigma hate. That's usually the primary use for it. Honestly, the only use for it. And we already went over these two, so that's basically all the sideboard, and that's more or less what you want to do with the sideboarding plans. A lot of times, if you just want something that's a little bit more generic, you bring in the 6D reacts, you bring in the Looking for Scraps, and like just a couple other things. Because you have 46 in the core of this deck that I currently have, so you need to bring in at least 14. The 14 I typically go for is like Siren's Call, Sink Below's, Looking for Scraps, Fate for Scenes, and then you get to bring in like maybe the Hisses, maybe like the weakest links, or like 2 Warmongers to fall asleep. That's typically what happens in a lot of my games, depending on where exactly I want to go with it. Hisses I don't typically bring in unless I feel like I don't really need anything else, or I'm bringing them in for like the Brute or Guardian matchups. I'll bring in the Warmongers more often than some people will because it's just blue block 3s. It helps boost my blue base a little bit more. And if I really need to, I can play this and then as an instant activate a cheat, pitch a cheat anew if I need to. So a lot of times he'll be bringing in the D-Reacts, he'll be bringing in like Siren's Calls. Those are probably the 9 most often picks that I grab. There's the Siren's Calls and the 2 D-Reacts, 3-ofs. And then weakest links and all that stuff. So those are the ways that I typically go about it. Here are your tokens. Now we're going to get to some potential options if you want to swap some of these cards. Some things that I'm thinking about. You could go up the 3rd copy of Hiss or the 3rd copy of Oasis if you really wanted to. I don't think they're particularly necessary. I think 3 Oasis might be a little bit of a trap because you only really want to play it off of a tunic counter. And if you ever get to a point where you have multiple of these in your hand, you just feel really bad about it. I don't think it's worth more than 2. If you want to, you can. Hiss is kind of the same thing. It's interchangeable with the Venomous Bite up here. If you want to swap that, you can swap those ratios if you think it's a little bit more key to your strategy. If you have a lot of like potentially like Guardians or potential like, if you think you're going wider rather than tall a lot of the time, the 3rd Hiss over the 3rd Venomous Bite's fine. That all you got. I took these out and put in the Fate for States because I preferred covering the breakpoints of Dio and Aurora with the on hits. I think covering 4 is very much a premium at this point. So I think that's pretty good. However, if you're going to see a lot more of like the Hatchet Dories, maybe the Kasai's with the Sabers, these clock the Sabers and like Zephyr Needles very easily, along with giving you the additional value of drawing a card. So this could be a potential include later when like maybe Ira comes in, because you get to cover Zephyr Needle or Kadachi with it and then just get an additional card at the end of the combat chain, which is pretty nice. Hurls are another option if you want to get even more Enigma hate. You can bring these in for one of the other blue attacks in here in your blue attack suite for pitches. Like you can maybe put it in over like Art of Desire Mind if you wanted. You can bring those in for like Bonds of Attraction. It gives you an additional 1 point of go again. It gives you the activators for the cheese. It gives you just another small attack that Enigma has to worry about if they want to protect the mirror guys. So that's the potential include. If you're not seeing a lot of Enigma, I don't think you need them. This is just something that if you really hate Enigma or you really want to just be able to go a lot wider, you can put these in. It's fine. Spreading Plague is another thing that's particularly solid into Enigma, because giving people Blood Rot on big blocks of, say, like Bonds of Agony. Like, someone over-respects Bonds of Agony is like, oh, I'm going to block with my whole hand. I'm going to block with 3 cards. I'm just going to do this and make sure that you cannot rip this last card out of my hand. I'm going to Arsenal it for next turn. And then you just get to, like, pitch 1 or activate Tunic and then just give them 3 Blood Rots so they take 6 damage on the following turn. It's pretty nice. I would probably try to get these in here at some point, but the problem is right now I just don't have the room. Like, I guess if you wanted to, you could put 1 copy in for the Cosmic Awakening and maybe take out, like, an Oasis or maybe one of these blues in here, one of the more generic blues for your, like, attack base, maybe like a Bonds of Attraction, maybe one of the Art of Desire, so fit in a 2nd copy. But I personally just haven't really found the need for them. It's a fantastic card, don't get me wrong, I just don't tend to have the room for it. So that's why it's in the maybe board right now. It's also very good into Enigma, it's good into the decks with Ward, it's good into decks that want to block heavily. You could get a lot of value out of them. I personally just don't have the room in my version of the list right now. Death Touch is kind of cute. It gives you an additional popper for the Phantasm attacks of Enigma and Prism. It also gives you additional potential lines off of the Codex of Frailty, as you can grab this with Codex of Frailty with just the Tunic counter, put that in the arsenal, send 6 with the on hit of give an Inertia token or something, or give a Blood Rot box, so it's like a 1 card 8. It's pretty solid. It can be quite good. The problem here is it's just, I don't think it has enough impact in this current metagame. You really want to just be like forcing them to like lose their arsenal, and this doesn't do that immediately. This is more just like raw damage output. But if you find a lot of Phantasm, like need for like popping Phantasm, this could be something that you can put in for like popping some Heralds and Prism and still get like a good amount of value out of it. You block this, you pop something, you put it in the graveyard, you maybe get a Codex turn off of it later. It has some lines. I would never run more than 1 copy, because sometimes it'll just it'll clunk up your hand if you're running multiples, because you can't play them from your hand. You have to put them in the arsenal first, and it's just, it tends to be like you're mostly playing these off of codex if you're playing them at all. And I just found that I wasn't playing them very often, even when I was there. But if you want additional popper, and you want to go up the 3rd weakest link and maybe get a 7th popper in there, there you go. This is a very good target for a 7th popper if you want it. Though I would recommend Erase Face first, as Erase Face is very good as an on-hit ability to remove talent and class types until the end of their next turn. So things like Dash IO or any Mechanologist, if this hits, they can no longer boost Mechanologist cards, which means boost doesn't work. They do not gain Go Again anymore. For Prism, it loses the light archetypes and they get a lot less value out of some of their abilities. It turns off Mystic stuff, it turns off Assassin stuff, so like, particularly in the new mirror, if they're running a lot of the Venomous Bites and whatnot, it'll turn off Venomous Bites because it doesn't have these talent types on the attacks that they're sending at you anymore. So they can't play them anymore. That's something to also keep in mind. This is also pretty good into stuff like Rune Blades sometimes, because none of their stuff is a Rune Blade card anymore. Like Viscerai doesn't get any triggers off anymore on the next turn. It has some uses. I think you could maybe run like Water 2. I almost brought them this week for when Dio released. I just didn't quite find the room for it, and I found out that I'm already pretty solid into Dio anyway. So I personally don't have them yet. I could consider putting them in at some point when I can maybe find the room. And that's pretty much the entire deck list. I will try to have an updated sideboard guide on the deck link itself here in a little bit, so I'll go like matchup by matchup for basically everything and just put in what I would potentially put in for the games. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think. I hope this turned out pretty well, and I will catch you in the next time I send a deck list. Go take this to your PQ, dominate some people. Yeah, have some fun, play their stuff, and I'll see you later. Bye.